But I mean, this is the time, that's the time to do some of that because, we all know as soon as you get out of school, it's sit your ass at the desk and draft, fool, because I don't have time to pay you to play with, the $1,500 plugin that you just bought. What's architecture really about? Archispeak is the show that dares to peek under the architectural kimono, exposing what architecture really is, what it is that architects really do, and show you why we are passionate about our chosen profession. I'm Neil Pan. Join Evan Troxell, Cormac Phelan, and me as we have a casual conversation about all things architecture, which includes all the stuff people don't talk about. Think you already know what architecture is really about? Tune in to find out. It's time for some Archispeak. So welcome to episode 17 of the Archispeak Podcast. I'm Neil Pan.
I'm Evan Troxell.
And I'm Cormac Phelan.
Evan's got some friends of the show we're going to announce first.
That's right. All right, so this week we had 3 $5 fans. And the first one we've got is Sharon Randall. Thanks, Sharon. The second is Hearth, the mysterious Hearth. And the last but not least $5 fan for this week is Troy Brown. So thanks, everybody. We really appreciate your support. And if anybody would like to consider supporting the podcast and what we're doing here, $5 minimum donation will get you your name read on the show, and we would love to do that for you. So please look at archispeakpodcast.com/donate, and all the information is on that page. And real quick before we start too is if you go to archispeakpodcast.com/episodes/17, you can find all the notes for the show that we're doing right now. And on every page of the show, there is on the right-hand side, there is a field that you can put your email address in and get all the show notes emailed to you the day that the podcast goes live so that you can follow along and not even have to go to the website. How cool is that? So I encourage everyone to do that. It's at archispeakpodcast.com.
So, Cormac, you teased us earlier this week about a quote, I guess it was, from Frank Gehry, and you have not actually told us what it is, and we thought it'd be kind of fun to have you just read it to us and get our raw reaction. So none of this is rehearsed. We have no idea what this is. So take it away.
Neil, do you have your Jeopardy buzzer ready?
I got to work on the sound effects. Sorry about that.
Who is Frank?
Add it in post.
All right.
What is no? Well, so we all follow so many different Facebook, Twitter, and other social media posts for different architects, artists, and things like that. And from the art and architecture page of on Facebook, the people that I follow, it's just called Art and Architecture. They had a quote from Frank Gehry, and I guess it because it was coming off of the heel. Reading this, it was coming off of the heels of one of our previous podcasts with talking about constraints and things like that, and all of the dialogue that we had about constraints. This one just kind of hit me as annoying as hell, to be quite honest with you, for me. And and so the quote was, "I don't know why people hire architects and then tell them what to do."
Oh, I've seen that before. I guess I've seen that on Life of an Architect.
Yeah, well, I haven't seen it there, but I mean, to me, first, without people, there wouldn't be there would be no work for the architects unless the architect is the developer himself and paying for it and doing everything all by himself. But since we don't live, work, design, and everything else within a bubble, and we do have all of these other constraints, first and foremost is what the client actually wants. Because that's what they come to us for. We were just having kind of a little pre-show chat about, meeting with clients and things like that. And so they're what drives us, right?
Well, I honestly see two sides to this, like everything.
And that's why I wanted to bring it up. I'm interested in what other people's reactions to this is, because, I understand, there's the, artistic aspect where, and even, and I say this often to every one of our interns, we're as much as we are designers, we're also educators. And, they come to us because we have the expertise. But, to me, it just rubbed me the wrong way because, it's this, overbounding ego of the architect basically saying, all right. Yeah, you came to me, you told me what you want, now go away and let me give you what I think you should have.
Well, yeah, I think it depends on the mood you're in when you read that. Because I can totally see where he's coming from when it comes to, there's a lot of times where we're working on a project, and to kind of take the opposite position you are, because I totally agree with what you're saying. The other position is, which I think is still valid, is architects are experts at architecture, and I think a lot of times people don't see it that way. They know what they know because they've seen it on TV, or they've seen it done by a contractor or a developer or whatever, and they go into a meeting or a relationship with an architect and they don't treat them like they are the expert at what they do. I see this all the time working on schools, where the perfect way to do it is the way that they did it with the school they built 15 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And so that is kind of, I think, that's where I would be coming from if I said that, I guess. If I had that tone and that, or, if I came at it from that angle. But then I also see it from the side that you presented first too, which is you've got to listen, you've got to discover, you've got to take into account all of the constraints that they throw at you, and you've got to come up with a solution that fits them like a glove. In which case you're taking ego out of it, right? You are purely solving the problem the best way that you can.
Right. Well, and I guess the way that I read it and interpreted it, or at least just...
It comes off very egotistical. Right?
It does. And I've seen, countless interviews with the guy. And he, especially more recently with the Eisenhower Memorial here in D.C., where they interviewed him over and over again. And there's such an uproar over this design. And nobody wants it from, the local... I can't remember the name of the board, but basically it's a board that, governs the art and design, public art and, public works and stuff. And then there's the Eisenhower family and everyone else who are just, up in arms. And he basically, made, with no apology. And why should he? He's busted his ass trying to do this design and stuff. But, he's just like, well, this is what it is. And I don't really care what you say or what your opinions are, and just kind of moved on. And really throughout the whole battle, just kind of didn't budge in his belief that he was right and who cares what they think.
Well, that could be true, but who knows?
And that's kind of how I read it based off of, my kind of my impression of him throughout this little, because it's pretty big local news, or at least in the architectural community, it's pretty big local news. And I just couldn't help but think about quotes like this, that's what does architects and architecture a disservice when they see, some pompous fool getting up there basically sitting there saying, this is what it is going to be, and you can't tell me otherwise. and all of the, the hardworking trench dwellers are just, sitting there saying, man, that's why, clients will come up to me and say, can you do this for $500? All I need is a set of blueprints, as we were sort of kind of chatting about pre-show, and just kind of, no wonder we have a respect problem.
Well, Cormac, I have an interesting example for you. I can understand, reading that quote. It's interesting. I think you have to consider the source of where it's coming from. In this case, as you said, you've seen interviews with him. You understand where he's coming from when he makes that statement. But let me give you one example of a project that I've been working on, where the client literally contacted me after they went down that road, where they tried to design it themselves. They hired somebody to draw some blueprints for them, and ultimately decided this really sucks and it's not what we want. And so they thought, well, okay, we really need an architect. And that's when they contacted me. And what's been interesting about the design process with them is that every time I've proposed something, they've mostly liked it, but then they come back to me a week later with all these changes that begin to morph it back into what they didn't want originally, that they said was not what they wanted. But they keep pushing the design back to these kind of awkward spaces and these weird, arrangements of spaces that were present in the initial design that they said that they ultimately didn't like. And so in that sense, that's a good example of, why are they hiring me when they just keep going back to what they want? And at some point, it's like I throw up my hands and say, okay, you're not even listening to my advice anymore. I'm just going to give you what you want because I can't keep continually redesigning this house.
Right.
So, so in that sense, I take his quote, from that perspective and say, why are you hiring me if you're not listening?
Right.
Yeah, you're not going to listen to better advice, and ultimately, if this is what they want, then that is what they want, and who am I to tell them they're wrong?
It is a delicate balance.
But yes, and it's a very delicate balance. But coming from somebody like him, there's definitely an ego involved there that, at least in my example, I'm trying not to be, throwing my ego around, but I'm trying to give them good advice and they're not necessarily listening.
Who knows what the original context was? I mean, that's a quote taken completely out of context.
Oh, that's true too. But it is an interesting quote. I mean, whether it's in context or out of context.
No, it's a good discussion point, I think. I mean, really, honestly, people do have a view of architects coming from that point of view. And that's, and they're like, why would I want to deal with that ever? Right. And then if you I'm guessing, I mean, I'm just giving him the benefit of the doubt. Because I've seen him quoted and I've seen him in interviews too. And I think totally straightforward. Right.
Well, oh yeah. And, don't get me wrong. I mean, he's putting himself out there and doing some, fantastic cutting edge work that, we all kind of wish that we could do.
Leaks.
Or at least have those clients and
it leaks.
Those budgets.
It goes over budget. Those are all things we want to do.
Like I and I'm probably going to misquote the actual numbers, but I remember reading a long time ago when the Disney Concert Hall was, I guess the initial budget was somewhere around the neighborhood of like $50 million or something like that, and then ultimately it ended up being like $450 million. Oh, how? I mean,
well, I'm sure it was all the client. Their scope was completely not in alignment with the budget.
Oh, well, yes, that's true. I mean, we've all heard of scope creep, but wow, that's not a creep, that's a monster. I mean, when we come up with something and, it's just like, well, everything that you've asked for, and for the budget of $30 million is really going to cost you $35 million. Then you spend most of your time trying to figure out what you can live without with, so that you can get back that, get it back under the 30 million mark, throwing out a number.
Well, this is kind of an interesting segue into kind of, Evan, what you wanted to also talk about in this episode about, I think the quote kind of ties in nicely with, do we care about that exterior, and what do we want to see out of students out of school, as working professionals? Because I think that that speaks a lot to what we're going to get into next. So, why don't you go ahead and tell us what the question was and how that got into what we're going to talk about.
So this just came up today, and I thought it was an interesting topic because the question was it was really a nice visit with a guy who is the dean of a brand new architecture school, meaning it started 2 weeks ago. And so he's been in the planning stages for the last 2 years, and I thought, wow, what an opportunity, right? And he even went into that a little bit, where he was saying, he's going all around the country, meeting with all the deans of all the architecture schools and saying, if you could start over, how would you do it with all of your experience? And something that came out from our side of the conversation was there's so much emphasis placed on the exterior of the building, exterior architecture. And there was a distinguishment between exterior architecture and interior architecture, which I thought was interesting, because I don't necessarily distinguish between the two myself, but this person did. And so basically the point was, students coming out of school are very good skinners. And the first time I'd heard that, right? But totally makes sense to me. And this kind of leads into something that is a reoccurring topic in my studio, which is architecture fashion or not, right? And so I thought that that's kind of an interesting topic to talk about.
Well, I wanted to just quickly address the fashion statement. And no, architecture isn't fashion. And when people believe that that's kind of what we do, or if we believe that that's what we do, then we're not really looking at what we really do, which is, whole building design.
Well, there is
interior, exterior, everything, and
yeah. Well, you can't argue though that there is not architecture that is not fashion. I mean, there's a lot of architecture that only is fashion.
Well, you can say that,
but you're saying by defining architecture.
By defining it just simply on how it looks, its curvaceous appeal that, we see from the street and all that other stuff. That really, you've just limited architecture to just, like the street appeal. But we do it, it goes back to what we were talking about with the Gehry thing. We do it to ourselves when we make these magazines. Isn't architecture, an architectural record, basically just a, architectural Playboy?
Oh, look at Arc Daily. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. We just look at the glossy pictures.
Well, not only that, but how long do you look at the glossy picture? About 2 seconds before you scroll
really
through?
Read it for the articles, but
yeah.
but we're looking for the centerfold. We're not really doing ourselves justice by, and so that's what people who are going to architecture school, they're looking at, I want to, they're flipping through these magazines, and I'm going to avoid saying what I was thinking, but they're looking through these magazines.
This is a PG-rated show, so.
Is it?
Well, we don't have an explicit tag, but
sometimes, yeah.
Okay. But you're looking at all these pictures, and they're like, "That's what I want to do." I want to do that. But nobody ever really sits down. I mean, unless I'm asking, did you guys have this? But did anybody sit down with you and really explain to you what architects really do? I mean, a lot of people just think we do the pretty pictures. We just draw buildings.
Well, that's because that's what people see architecture as a product, I think, most of the time.
Exactly. So and so back to
that is the society we live in.
But Cormac, if you think back in school, and I don't know what school's like now, but all the projects, back when I was in school, and taking out the old man cane here, just that. If you were really good with your graphics, pencils and ink markers and stuff like that, I always called it, is it the steak or the sizzle? Is it a good project, or is it just like, holy crap?
Did you just say...
guy's... What? What did I just say? What?
You said exactly what a client not too long ago said. I'm not worried about the steak. For this presentation, we just want to see the sizzle. And I've never heard that before. I swear to you, I've never heard that before.
That is an old saying from an architect I used to work for.
He is on the East Coast.
Yeah, news travels slowly out to
3 years behind.
No, the problem is that we said it a decade ago, but it got out to you guys.
You already forgot
it. And it's
we'd already forgotten about it.
Yeah. So, no, but what I was getting at was, the projects that look good. I mean, if you've got the great graphic hand, and there was rarely, there's always that one or two people in class that not only had the great graphic hand, the pens and the markers and everything, but then they had a great design work. But most people, there might be some great graphics out there, but you start looking at the project and it's like, maybe we'll get into this maybe later, but it's art. It doesn't work. I don't know what that is, but
this plays right into that quote that I put down, which you didn't like, which is,
what quote was that?
Let me look it up.
No, design has to work. Art does not.
Design has to work, and art does not. I mean,
Donald Judd. We'll have a link to that in the show notes.
I think that's a great quote because, that really gets to the heart of this issue for me. That's the difference between architecture and a building, and that's the difference between architecture and fashion, which is the real problem solving to me happens in the planning of the building. And that is when you are going through the process with the client and you are working out the solution to all of the things that are issues to them. And hopefully there's a lot of them, and those are the constraints that we've been talking about. So look at the Walt Disney Concert Hall. Fashion or, is that art or design?
It leaks.
Have you been in it?
No, I haven't actually.
I've the last time we were in Los Angeles, I hunted it down and we walked past it. Didn't walk in it because...
Okay, and so your street perspective reaction was what?
Oh, it was eye candy. It was, wow, look at this thing.
Well,
this
is,
but
how the hell did they make that thing real? I mean, that's what you see when you walk up and you can walk around it and you can touch that building, right?
But that's what we see.
That's true.
More seasoned people versus somebody who's coming at it, and I'm just talking about the perspective of this guy who was asking you about what you want to see, out of an architecture school or something. The people going into architecture school have that, initial visceral, oh wow, look at that, that's amazing, and don't really kind of piece together what it took to get that building to where it's at now. So yeah, you're right.
Well, I would say that, what you said about that's our perspective versus, I bet you there are a lot of people who say that's not architecture, right? To a lot of people, architecture is tradition.
Absolutely.
Right? It's dogma. It's the architecture of the past, and this is purely sculpture, or fashion.
Yeah, and there's a lot to be there's actually a lot to be said about the stance that a lot of traditionalists take when it comes to buildings like that. Because to me, and this was a discussion that goes all the way back to school, are you just creating like this little jewel box that can be picked up and put anywhere, that has no real sense of place?
Contextless.
Right. Yeah, it has absolutely no context. It has no like state of being in one place or another. It literally could be picked up and put anywhere.
Right.
And something like the Disney Concert Hall is a great example of that. It can be picked up and moved from place to place to place, and no one would know the difference. You know, and
well, that's true, but this also is a dichotomy, because this building, when it does have an exterior presence and it does have an exterior experience, this building is really all about the concert space on the inside, and it is actually like you're inside an instrument. And yes, maybe it doesn't matter what its surroundings are, but it's not even, who cares?
Well, you know, in the ultimate use of the building, you're right. You know, it's about, you know, and I know, because if as much as I've read about the building, is, you know, how much he went through, you know, painstaking design with, you know, acousticians or whatever, however you pronounce it properly, and is, you know, to really get it to work perfectly with the instruments and the music and everything else, and just, but that's not, I mean, is the use of the building, if it's a successful use of the building, does that make it good architecture if the rest of it just kind of fails because it has no context? It has, and I'm not saying that this doesn't, I'm just, as a general, throwing it out there, does a building that doesn't, you know, really respond to its surroundings, but works perfectly as whatever it was supposed to be, is that good art? I mean, is that architecture? I mean,
yeah. I just love that it creates such a rich discussion. You know, I think that's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
Because let's look at the other side. I mean, one of the examples that was brought up in the same meeting today was Kahn's Kimball Art Museum in Texas.
Right. Yeah.
And, okay, so let's look at both of these examples as if they were studio projects in school. All right? Which one is going to get the attention? Assume that the graphics were equal in presentation. So I pasted the link into Skype. You guys can check it out. We'll put the link in the show notes. But on greatbuildings.com, just go to the Kimball Art Museum and look at the plan drawing of that building. It's like super boring, right? I think it would, as somebody said today in the meeting, it would get ripped to shreds in a true crit, where you've got a jury showing up and they're basically, you know, judging your skills on layout. Go ahead.
I was going to say, or are they judging your skills on fashion?
Well, they could be, yeah.
Because
that building is, again, if you look at the planning, it is very simple. But if you go, as in most of Kahn's work, if you go to the Salk, or if you see the Exeter Library, I mean, it's like you look at these buildings and they are about a move, one move typically. Where you look at a Gehry building, there's a lot going on there. Okay. And they're totally different. But if you experience the Kimball Art Museum from the inside, that's what it's about. Okay. Pure and simple. It's about light and mood.
But you even still get that light, mood, and movement and everything else from the exterior, you know, as you're moving around it. And, you know, it's still kind of, you know, it kind of sits there. But I mean, it's got a presence to me that far more contextual than, like, say, the, you know, let's use one of Gehry's art museums.
I wasn't even alive when this thing was built, so I don't know. But it's hard to say.
And if you, but think about it. I mean, you know, still today, to you, even though it's of, you know, a completely different time, there's movement and motion and all of these other things, and the way that the light, interplay of light in some of the more public spaces and even the exterior spaces with, all of these different, slatted roof and everything. It actually makes you, it still gives you a comfortable feeling, or at least this is, I'm giving you my perspective of it.
Well, look, I mean, and this also goes back to the discussion of the vernacular, right? I mean, that's why people love traditional architecture, is because of the feeling it gives them. But
let's go back to, something that you were saying a little bit earlier about, okay, so when you go inside the Kimball Art Museum, it functions perfectly as an art museum. Depending on, your thought of exactly what, I mean, there's numerous different people who have numerous different thoughts about how an art museum should work. Mm-hmm. But then you read like all of the criticisms, and no, I haven't been in this building, so I really can't, say whether or not a lot of the criticisms are right, but you read the criticisms about the Bilbao, Guggenheim at Bilbao, and most of it is that the building overpowers the artwork.
Yeah, right.
It's
foreground.
So the question, I mean, does that make it a successful, art museum if it's overpowering what you actually are going there to experience and see? I had this.
How many people go there to see the building?
Well,
all the architecture students.
All the architecture students. The ones who are standing outside because they don't have enough money to go into the museum and are sketching it and taking pictures. Yeah. Those are the people who go there to see the building.
That's more than just the architecture students, I would imagine.
Well, that's true too. But I mean, okay, so
sorry, tangent.
I had this blog that's now defunct because the Twitter actually bought the God, I can't even remember what the blog
Posterius or something.
Posterius.
It's not your rear. Yeah. No.
Yes.
Sorry.
my posterior blog.
Your posterior blog.
And
that's where it went.
Exactly. But I had written kind of a comparison criticism about the new Salvador Dali Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida. And to me, it's pure eye candy. Because the experience when you go inside and you're trying to look at the work and experience, for me, what the reason why I went there was really about, the reason why I went there was because I used to work at the old Dali Museum and knew, and even though it was in a prefabricated metal building, the way that the interior was laid out, it gave you certain perspectives of certain different works and stuff. And the way that they laid out the new building, all of those perspectives were removed. So you were staring at some of his 2-story tall masterworks at ground level staring up, when in the old building you were kind of standing at half, at kind of like the midpoint.
Your perspective was different.
So you had a completely different perspective. And to me, I thought that was a better way. And in fact, Dali himself intended them to be looked at in that particular way. And so I was completely annoyed at the new building because the new building...
It was an object. It was fashion.
It was a jewel box. That's all it was. It was nothing. It was intended. It was designed and intended for one purpose, and that was to house and display Dali's work. And it doesn't do it very successfily.
Well, don't you think that building is kind of derived from? I would imagine. I haven't looked into it, but it's got to be derived from something of Dali. I would think by looking at it.
They make the claim that yes. Okay, so it's a big concrete box with a glass bubble basically melting through it.
Yeah, the triangulated glass.
Yeah,
right.
And it it looks. I mean.
It's attractive.
The gestures look kind of cool. But, just
Well,
from this.
I wonder if that pulls a lot of people in. I mean, I would think that the concert hall does that too, but I wonder if the Kimball does that.
Well, you know, I mean,
it's street presence, if you will.
That, you know what, in
Curb
probably
appeal?
not. Probably
Doesn't have
not.
the right curb appeal.
You know, in another good example, and you know, it's another art museum is there's in fact, it's
You're killing me here with all these buildings, man. The
I was
links are
thinking
just gonna
about
go insane.
I was thinking about the Denver Art Museum.
great example. You know, is it, you know, and without knowing anybody or anyone who's, and in fact, I haven't even read any write-ups on, you know, on how it's experienced and stuff, but you know, you probably go there for the eye candy from the street. You know, I
Heck yeah, walk under that cantilever.
oh yeah. You know, and yeah.
Well, and there's even this crazy ass proposal for the LACMA in LA. I mean, it's the object in the field, you know.
But okay, so we know, and kind of let's bring this back around to the question that the guy was asking you guys.
Good idea.
Is so we know that, yeah, even though there are, you know, they are eye candy, and you know that's what draws a lot of people in, and even, you know, controversy of its appearance is what draws people in. Because you're going to have traditionalists who would have much rather seen, you know, this Greek colonnade, and would much prefer to do, you know, experience a museum like that. But they're still going to go in because they want to see, you know, the modernist abomination that, you know, should have been something else. But so we can look at that and we can see how, you know, what kind of went into creating that building. All of the different, you know, engineering trades and all the architectural hours of interaction with the client and the engineers and everything else that went into it to make that whole building. To kind of bring it back around to the whole building idea that I was kind of originally thinking about. That's really what we should be kind of focusing on in architecture school. I mean, we've talked about, you know, a couple of, you know, I think it was like one of the first two episodes, you know, we had talked about, you know, I guess our impressions of the failings of architectural education and how it doesn't kind of marry up with the actual practice of architecture. And I don't want, you know, I don't want to keep.
Well, I mean, I guess one of the questions I have is, okay, so there, yeah, it is like you said, it's hard to get back into, but is there even time to explore a solution that is beyond the outer 6 inches of the building in a 10-week class? I mean, really, the emphasis is form making and it isn't planning, because it is so much based on parametric plugins and there's so many of these buzzword tools that people are trying to use and outdo, you know, the competitive nature of the studio class, and they're trying to outdo what they've done before and the other students in the class, and you never get to the meat of the problem. Well, there's no client.
Well, that's true. You know, do you think that architectural studio is set up in the way that's, just like you said, it's really dissected into little small explorations? And rather than that, because in a way, none of what we do on a daily basis, I mean, think about the many years that go into a single project. You know, maybe we should be approaching education, and, you know, and again, I always keep going, teach the basics the first 2 years. Do all of these little projects and do all these little, you know, teaching them about, you know, the golden section and all of these other different notions and ideas and fun things that we learn. but then start to put it into a practical application where you give them a year-long project. One project.
Yeah.
All year long.
Well, look at Rural Studio, right?
Rural Studio is a great example. And in fact, that's, that's an exception to the rule because they're teaching you, you go out there in second year. When you go out there in second year, you're doing a lot of design work and grunt work, but, you're able to see, and this is the thing that I have always thought was the beauty of the Rural Studio. In something that I kind of preach to, interns that come work with me, that it teaches you that the lines that you put on the paper actually mean something.
Right.
Greater than just, the composition that you're creating on a 24 by 36 sheet of paper. It actually has to be built. And the beauty of that is that that person who put the pen, the pencil to the paper is also swinging the hammer. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is just the most invaluable tool because it actually shows you, okay, oops, I screwed up on where I did my calculations wrong, or I did this, I just sketched this up and I thought it would look really cool. But now that I actually build it and I see what the actual materials are and everything else, I can't actually do it the way that I hoped to do it.
The great thing about that is that it takes the blame out of the equation.
Exactly.
Right? There is no one to blame. It's all on you.
Yeah.
And it isn't about pointing the finger. It is about finding the solution, which is what we are supposed to be doing anyway.
But Cormac, shouldn't school also be a time when you can play and maybe have some fun and not worry about so much, can this be built, but explore ideas and I know it eventually has to be built, but one of the things that I don't know, maybe it's just who I was, maybe it didn't really matter, but I thought one of the things that hindered me in school was that I went and worked first and then for a few years or something and then moved off to school and but it always made me think in the back of my head. Yes, it made me think practically, and maybe that's just who I am, so maybe that throws out that equation, but I always felt that my fellow classmates that didn't have any experience, had never drafted detail in their life, were much more free to explore and not really think about could something be built or they nowadays they'd probably be the ones at the computers doing all the fancy plugins and hey, check out this rendering technique, doesn't that make my place this skin look cool? Well, but this is the time, that's the time to do some of that, because we all know as soon as you get out of school, it's sit your ass at the desk and draft, fool, because I don't have time to pay you to play with, the $1,500 plugin that you just bought.
Well, no, I think, honestly, now, I think that's how it was when you got out of school, Neil.
Okay.
And when I got out of school. But now, the students coming out of school are not drafting. What are they doing? They're modeling, they're rendering, and they're doing Photoshop and presentations, because no one in the firm who's been there a long time knows how to do any of that stuff. But that is what the clients expect.
But how different is that than when we got out of school and you got stuck in graphics? I did.
I got stuck doing details. And that's when putting a line on the page or in the computer mattered.
Well, true, but one of my first big jobs, serious jobs after school, I was stuck in graphics for a while. Right. And before they ever let me sit down at all of the 4 computers they had at the office at the time for 36 people, then it was like, oh well, we only draft things, little fun old man get off my lawn here, but we only draft plans in the computer, elevations, we can't do that. That's you got to draw those by hand. And then, eventually somebody realized
it just seems
we
like
could draw them in the computer, and, wow, look where we're at today.
It's always a transitional phase, it seems like.
Yes,
but let me ask you this. Okay. Yes, I will agree that school, there needs to be a certain portion of school that is fostering the exploratory nature of architects so that they can learn and understand and appreciate the spatial relationships of plan, section, elevation, and everything else, and really kind of understand space creating, space making.
Thinking spatially.
Yeah. But ultimately, what are you going to school for?
So Cormac, here's another example. When I was in school, we were doing things all by hand, and there was one quarter, and this was back in 1990, where the professor I had set up a class. He got 4 licenses to some, crazy architecture program out of Europe called Archicad. We all know about it nowadays, but this was like version 2 point something, and we spent an entire quarter doing nothing but exploring, what we now call BIM. But we could model stuff and explore those insides and sections and plans, and it was like, one of the things we did was our professor said, okay, well, for your first presentation, I want to see 50 different perspectives. And, that was unheard of at the time. I was like, I don't have time to draw that many different, hand draw that. Well, with the computer, we could, and we could sit inside the spaces and actually experience them, I think, for the first time of all of our careers in 3 dimensions. What we called, or what was kind of crude 3-dimensional modeling at the time. But, that was a chance for us to really explore that. So I think with the tools that the students have today, I think they can take that to a whole nother level of reality. And
I'm still blown away, though, by sitting down with trace and a pen, and you can look at a plan or a section, and you can sketch in perspective what the inside of that space looks like, because you think in 3D.
Right.
It's in your brain.
But
you know how to do it, and you don't have to just place a camera in a virtual environment and look at it.
Right.
But I don't. To me, that's a skill that is just, you cannot replace that.
No, you can't. But I don't think. But Evan, you can't say that every. And I'm not implying you are, but not every student, just because they can model well, doesn't also have that ability to visualize. And maybe if they had to draw it up, but the tools today are different. They don't have to sketch up that space in 3 dimensions, but they may be thinking about it in 3 dimensions. I know that's the way I think, and if I had better knowledge of the tools today, I can do fun stuff like you post, that just makes me jealous as hell. All the cool renderings of things that you post on your site. I'm like, wow, I love that stuff. I think that way, but I don't have the modeling skills. I could maybe sketch it poorly because we don't do that so much anymore.
Back to your question, Cormac. To me, I think the purpose, at least what I got out of school, was that and something I wouldn't trade for the world, is I learned how to learn. And I really feel like it set me on a path of lifelong learning, where I'm not ever feeling like I've got this figured out. And I think that is one of the intangibles of a great architectural education. It is an amazing thing that teaches you don't know the answers, and it's your job to figure them out. And that's why we are a generation of problem solvers. Not even a generation. This is a discipline of problem solving.
Absolutely. And that, it sounds like what you just said sounds very much like a rant I was giving to someone as we were driving to the job site. Because she's new, fresh out of college, and I was asking her, why did you get into architecture, and what do you think architecture is, and all of this other stuff, and basically trying to get around to talking about problem solving, and that's kind of the most you just said it. I mean, that's the most important skill that we have, is being able to identify and ask the questions and keep asking and keep learning. And, you ask more questions and you learn more about the solution, and then you keep asking more. And it may have solved one solution, but now you're on to the next one, and it just continues to build. You're right. I mean, that is one of the most valuable things that come out of school. But, what should be the practical, you've got the intangible of, this desire to continue to learn and problem solve and things like that, that really is not quite a tangible thing. But what is the tangible things that we should expect, require, demand out of new graduates? Is it simply you should know the latest and greatest tool to draft, design, and model so that we can use you and abuse you to our fullest extent in doing renderings and modeling and things like that, and eventually you'll get the knowledge to really kind of cut it as an architect or an architectural professional. But as of right now, all we really need you for is, can you crank this stuff out because we've got a presentation? I mean, what is it that we should be expecting, as the tangible knowledge coming out of school? I mean,
well, what were some of the answers people in your office had for this gentleman?
Well, my answer was, you've got to show an ability to think spatially, and you've got to. I guess one of the things that I don't like to see in graduates is checking stuff off the list. You give them a set of red lines, and they do most of them. You know what I mean? They just do them, and they're not thinking about what they're doing, but they're just doing. Right. And to me, that is a college training someone how to work in a cubicle rather than training someone how to think for themselves, and even to ask questions, even if that is the most annoying thing that you can think of on a Monday morning. As someone who's worked in the profession, it is invaluable to the development of that individual to be able to have a safe place to ask a ton of questions and fill their mind with experience that way. And so thinking spatially, learning how to learn, learning how to ask questions, and because honestly, is their main skill, if it is rendering and modeling, that adds value to your firm. I mean, it is something that is necessary and needed, but what you don't want to do is pigeonhole that person into that position.
It's a buildable skill.
Architects need to be well-rounded individuals who have a multitude of experience in so many of these different parts of the discipline. It is a huge multidisciplinary vocation, and we need to be able to think in business and in design and in production and in management and in all of these things. And there's no way we could ever expect someone to come out of school with that kind of education.
Yeah, and I don't think that's what I was actually getting at is, are they able to, out of the box be an architect? No. But
there are a lot of people who complain about what people don't come out of school with, though, right? And a lot of times I listen to the complaint and I'm like, do you seriously expect them to come out of school with that kind of experience?
I even complain about what they don't learn, but it's more in the intangibles that you were talking about on the, it's okay to fail, because when you fail, you learn, and, you can grow from that. And I think everybody is so fearful of failure or mistakes
But Cormac, you're so right about that, and that's not a failure of architecture school. That's a failure of our education system in general. And I'm only I say that as the parent of a first grader and a third grader right now. The not only I'll say that part of this is peer pressure too. It's like you don't want to fail, especially as an 8-year-old, around all of your buddies in class. You don't want to look like a fool. I mean, nobody does. But fostering that environment in the classroom where, it is okay to fail or okay to ask questions. I don't see that in the elementary school right now. And, maybe therefore we're not seeing it in architectural school, and maybe we're not therefore seeing it in the office. But you're right, Evan, you have to have that sense and also too, as the individual, you have to take it upon yourself to ask the stupid question.
Sure.
We hear it all the time, right? It's okay to ask stupid questions, but none of us want to do it.
Don't you think going to architecture school kind of cures you of that, though? I mean, I know it did for me. You had to unlearn all of the stuff all those bad habits that were taught to you in regular school. I mean, I know I did in mine. And going through juries and crits, how many times did you hear at the end of your quarter or semester, that was a good first pass, right? And you're like, first pass? I just spent 10 weeks or 16 weeks or whatever you went through of my life on this. And this is the 20th version of this project that I built 12 study models, and I did digital models, and I did all these drawings, and I've gone through 3 rolls of trace. That wasn't a first pass. And now looking back at that as a professional, like I could have gone through that 10 weeks in 1 week, right? Because now I can be so much more focused and I have so much more experience that to me, sitting on a jury, that is a first pass, right? But it was so degrading to go through that. And you go through that enough and you finally start to realize that that's the right perspective to have, because you do get more experience and you do get faster at it. And you start to get rid of those bad habits.
Right. But isn't it also the point, and I know we have this as one of our topics to talk about at some point, is, isn't it the point, though, of being on a jury to be told, that's crap? And it may be decent, but, it's crap. And
Wow.
You got to learn from that, right? I mean, you have to learn that it is your first pass, and maybe that's the point.
Well, and it is the first pass according to them, right? It's the first time they're seeing it.
That's true. But, I mean, who wants to go to a crit and just be told, you're great? And maybe you are, but well, you are, Cormac.
I think that, it's a really interesting thing to talk about. And I think we've been all over the place tonight, but
well, we have.
We never promised to stay on topic, and it is kind of like everyone's just listening in on our conversation. But these are real issues. The education thing is a huge issue that a lot of people are talking about. Obviously, it's not just us, and we know people who are taking that issue head on. And I think it's a really interesting problem, and I think it's something that the industry has to get a lot more involved in. If there's something that we want out of the education system, then it's on us to tell them and to make it happen. I mean, because otherwise they're operating in a vacuum. You know what I mean? And so that it is an issue that people need to devote time to if it's something that they want to see something else come out of. It's really interesting.
I think the answer to the first question tonight, which is architecture fashion, is really individualized. I know it was a question that was asked, I think, when I first started architecture school. It's like, okay, write a paragraph or write a paper. What is architecture? Everybody has a different opinion of what is architecture. And some people are going to think that, the Denver Art Museum or the Disney Concert Hall is architecture. And to some people, that is architecture. And then to other people, the Kimball Museum or just, the house next door, that's architecture. So it's something different to everybody. And I don't think either one is right or wrong. But as an architect, when I look at something like this Disney concert hall, I just go, what? But I'm like, wow, maybe I just don't think that way. And
well, I think a lot of it has to do with
that somebody does, and they get it built.
Well, that's a huge thing. But I mean, I guess a lot of it comes down to you've got to go experience it for yourself.
Yeah.
And then you get to decide, right? And it might not take more than one visit. But I went to Sydney thinking, Sydney Opera House, it's kind of weird, right? But when I was there and I actually got to touch it and walk around the whole thing, it took on a whole different meaning to me. And I think, the concert hall was like that for me too. And I think a lot of times when we look at these buildings that we do not get, right? I mean, you look at it in a photograph, in a two-dimensional image. How can you get it? You know what I mean?
Architecture has to be experienced.
It does have to be experienced. And I think that is also one of the differentiators of architecture versus fashion, or architecture versus a building.
Yeah.
It is not something purely to look at. It is something to be experienced, and that it really can change your mind. It could change your mood. It can do a lot of things, and that's what makes it architecture, to me at least.
Well, that sounds like a good place to wrap it up tonight, guys. What do you think? All right, so if you have any questions or comments, please visit our website at archispeakpodcast.com, or you can also find our individual Twitter accounts, which are listed on the website as well. You can follow Archispeak on Twitter, and please post links or interesting topics on our Facebook page. And don't forget to call and leave a message. We're still waiting for that first caller. Who's it going to be? The number is 415-484-8496. It's listed on the website. That's why nobody's calling us, because I misquote the number. It's on the website. And you can click a link too. And then also, lastly, don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes. We're proudly the most reviewed architectural podcast on iTunes, so we want to keep that up.
Woohoo!
Okay, guys. Thank you very much.
All right. See you next time.
See you next time.
See you guys.
I love to watch your fireworks
It's our podcast.
Podcast.
You can't tell me what to do.
What you talking about?